I'm Harlan Crow, and welcome to Old Parkland for this debate. I am terrifically excited about this for two reasons. One reason will be grasped quickly by everybody here. I had two choices tonight. There's a University of Texas fraternity party at my house. And I was able to get out of that, thank God. And here I am. But more importantly, we built this facility with the hope, I think now it's getting louder, with the hope that we could hold debates here. And during the several months that it's been here, we've had some debates. We've had some high school debates and some college debates, which have been terrific. But from my point of view, this is big boy debate, and I'm really, really excited about it. I'm grateful to the people at National Review Foundation and to the Hoover Institute Foundation or something like that. I've got my Library and Archives, thank you, for doing all the heavy lifting to make this possible. And Lindsay Craig and Tom Gilligan at Hoover, Jack Fowler at National Review, Jonah Goldberg, my friend at National Review, are here. I don't know if Jack's here, but okay. Anyway, but there's a great crowd from National Review and from Hoover Institute here that will take over. We also have Robert Augustinelli. Am I saying that right? Robert is the chairman of the National Review Foundation, and he's, I think, running a little late, but he'll be coming in the door in just a few minutes. Anyway, I want to thank you all for taking time to come out and be a part of this. And I want to thank all the presenters and debaters for making all this possible. Lindsay Craig runs the National Review Foundation, and she's going to take over from here, and I'm going to join the audience and just be happy I'm not at a fraternity party.
Well, welcome. On behalf of the National Review Institute and the Hoover Institution Library and Archives, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon here at Old Parkland as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of Bill Buckley's iconic TV program, Firing Line. My name is Lindsay Craig. I'm the president of National Review Institute, which is the nonprofit sister organization to National Review magazine, with which I'm sure you're all very familiar. Our mission at NRI is to preserve and promote the legacy of William F. Buckley, Jr. and advance the conservative principles that he championed while supporting some of the top talent at National Review. We are working to expand our programs that bring Bill Buckley's legacy to millions of Americans who, whether they are familiar with Buckley's work or not, have been touched by the conservative principles and the movement that he supported. NRI has expanded its activities in Dallas over the past 2 years. We held our annual William F. Buckley Prize Dinner here last fall. We added a new board member from Dallas. And this fall, we will mark the 3rd year of our Dallas Regional Fellows Program, which introduces mid-career professionals working outside of the realm of politics and policy to conservatism's most important writings, thinkers, and institutions over an 8-course program. In 2015, National Review Institute launched the Buckley Legacy Project to reach audiences across the country, including both longtime Buckley and National Review supporters, as well as students who are less familiar with his work. Our gathering tonight is part of this effort, the first of 3 events we're hosting around the country in partnering with the Hoover Institution Library and Archives to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Firing Line, where Buckley spent 3 decades facilitating civil debate on divisive issues. In that spirit, we hope that today's debate on immigration will generate more light than smoke. Profound thanks to the Hoover Institution Library and Archive, which houses an extensive array of documents, transcripts, photographs, and film footage of Firing Line. The Hoover Institution works to make Firing Line's episodes broadly accessible, both digitally and in the public setting, and we are all grateful beneficiaries of that work. And of course, special thanks to Harlan Crow and the Old Parkland campus staff for offering their space and allowing us to hold today's event in these beautiful new debate chambers. I know you built this place to honor the American experiment, and it clearly shows. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us to pay tribute to Buckley's work on firing line, which inspired 3 decades of productive conversation. We miss those sometimes, don't we? So tonight's format. Each panelist will offer brief remarks and then a cross-examination by a member of the opposing team. On your seats, you will find our program, as well as an index card. Please write down your question, which could be for a specific person or the topic in general. We will collect these cards twice, and only twice during the program, so that we don't disturb the discussion. We hope that you enjoy the debate, and when it concludes, please join us for a celebratory reception right outside the debate chambers. We are so grateful for so many old and new friends to be with us here tonight to honor the legacy of William F. Buckley, Jr. And to set the proper tone, we are now going to view a short video of clips that we've compiled from Buckley's most memorable firing line exchanges. Afterwards, you'll hear from National Review Institute fellow Jonah Goldberg and his reflections on firing line. Thank you once again for joining us in celebration of firing line at 50. Thank you.
For over 3 decades and over 1,500 broadcasts, the Emmy Award-winning program Firing Line, hosted by William F. Buckley Jr., was broadcast into millions of American homes every week on public television. Beloved, controversial, hugely influential, and conceived as a simple exchange of opinions, Buckley described Firing Line as the only program on the air that gives to presidents and poets a full hour in which to disclose themselves.
The topic tonight is the hippies, an understanding of whom we must, I guess, acquire or die painfully. Professor Milton Friedman is considered by some people the leading economist in the entire world. That in itself is eye-catching, though, come to think of it, somebody has to be the leading economist in the entire world.
I think most of the poor people are perfectly responsible, respectable people who, given half a chance, don't want to be on welfare any more than you or I want to be.
See, you're a wise man, and you make a man think.
I often think when you're going for consensus, so often it means that those who believe, as I believe, tend to give in to the left wing, and you steadily move further and further left.
Balancing the budget is a little bit like protecting your virtue. You just have to learn to say no.
The Democratic politicians, the so-called liberal politicians, have been more exciting and more interesting. Now, part of the reason for that is that they can be less responsible. Because whenever they have a problem, they say, well, the government will do something.
I think that many more people are convinced, not by actions of power, but by the precepts of people they listen to, and by some sort of an internal search to do the right thing.
Let's talk about it for a moment. Ever since the Civil War, and before that, I'm not even going to take the period of slavery in, this is a Christian, Western civilized nation. They've constantly been talking about the fact that the mystical body of Christ knows no color line. They go to church and they hear all this in nice segregated churches. And on a rational basis, all the anthropologists have come up with their various findings, cutting across through this color barrier, etc. Do you think that there would have been any change as far as civil rights legislation, as far as many of the breakthroughs that have occurred?
Of course.
Oh, well, come on. I don't know what fairyland you're living in. If you call me
America, that's my fairyland, the country you don't know. Senator Goldwater is both a Republican and a conservative, terms which he has not found, or at least not yet found, to be mutually exclusive.
And I might say, Bill, this is my chief worry as a conservative, that we have put so much power in the office of the presidency that someday the wrong man could come along. And I wouldn't be so concerned about whether he could use these powers to perpetuate himself in office, but how he would use these powers to destroy people that disagreed with him, to pile up voters where voters don't usually pile up. I think Johnson is fully aware of the powers that he has, and he certainly has used them and will use them.
Adam
in a most ungallant fashion. Tries to blame the whole thing on me. The woman tempted me. He streaks for the bushes. Gets himself in the bushes, hides from God. And then when God hauls him forth, blames it on the woman. Now there's your typical male chauvinist right from the beginning.
I understand the Christian tradition to be one that says merely because you have an appetite is not an excuse for giving in to it. And I understand the Playboy philosophy to be saying it is to lead to a kind of a neurotic repression to ask somebody to give it. Incidentally,
Freud said that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Freud said that.
Well, no, he didn't say quite exactly that.
Well, see, one of the things I think that's very important.
In the first place, he was a very orthodox monogamist.
All right, I think that we're more apt to get...
What Freud said was understand what it is that you're doing to yourself.
We are more apt to get...
But he was not a latitudinarian as regards personal behavior.
We are more apt to get true monogamy, happy monogamy, something other than the sequential polygamy that we really have in society today. I think if we take a more realistic...
If I may say so, how in the hell do you know? How do you know?
But since the Second World War, we became the world's major imperialist power. And Vietnam is simply one piece of an attempt to construct a very large integrated world system, of which Greece was another piece.
Yeah, we became an imperial power, Mr. Chomsky, in the sense that we inherited primary responsibility for any chain of action that might involve us in a third world war,
I don't believe
and something that might involve the entire world in Holocaust. And
no,
under the circumstances, well, I know you don't believe it, but
in fact, I think that
it might be refreshing to listen to this point of view, which is that there are people who do believe that America, unhappily and certainly not desiring it, inherited the responsibility for trying to abort international Holocaust. And has from time to time done so by such ventures as the Truman Doctrine, Marshall Aid, and things like that.
I think that people under the age of 30 come from a entirely different way of life. I think that they're mutants.
Well, they're younger, yeah.
No, they've been brought up in a world, Bill, which is entirely different from the one that you and I knew. It's already gone beyond my comprehension. The kids today are into electronics. They're into experiments in consciousness. They're into a level of awareness which I can dimly grasp, but can only, as it passes me by, take off my hat and say Godspeed to.
Yeah, well, I say Godspeed to them too, without necessarily handing them pot in the same gesture.
If we could just adopt a little convention to recognize that ground wars by now and air wars, which are short of nuclear wars, are fought for image, we could buy a tract of land in the Amazon.
Why do you call it image? For instance, when Israel tries to rebuff the Arabs, do you call it image?
Oh, but that was a different war. That was an altogether different war. Are we going to talk about all wars?
All wars are different except those that you say are the same.
No, I don't. I'm perfectly...
First place, you start out by saying all wars nowadays are fought for image except nuclear wars. So I brought up the Israeli war. Now you say except it. Are you going to wrench everything as inapplicable to your generality?
I said all our wars. All right, I was imprecise. I'll give you that.
If Lloyd's of London had been asked to give odds that I would be disagreeing with Ronald Reagan on a matter of public policy, I doubt they could have flogged a quotation out of this swingingest betting man. Because judging from Governor Reagan's impeccable record, the statisticians would have reasoned that it was inconceivable that he should make a mistake. But of course it happens to everyone. I fully expect that someday I'll be wrong about something.
Well, Bill, my first question is, why haven't you already rushed across the room here to tell me that you've seen the light?
Are you saying the communists invented patriotism in Panama?
No.
Yes, well, you really tried to say that.
No. No, Bill, I really didn't.
Would you yourself consider what you had previously attributed to the market, and which I now attribute to legislation, and your handling of that, an especially talented evasion?
No, but I would classify your defenselessness as obvious.
Whose idea was it for me to go on after Buckley? This is a great honor to be here. It's great. It's wonderful to be here. It's great to see, as Harlan said, my friend. One of the things I know about Harlan Crow is the one thing he hates most in this world is to have people talk about him in public, so the less said, the better. My only complaint is I was not told there was an option to go to a University of Texas fraternity party instead of this. Thank you all for being here. I love this room. This is my second time speaking in this room. Every time I'm in here, I feel like I should be urging you to vote for a more forceful response to the sinking of the Lusitania. That was Bill Buckley, and one of the questions you get asked a lot when you work at National Review is, what was Bill Buckley really like? And Bill, I always tell people, and I didn't know him as well as Rich did, but Rich is going to debate, so I get to do this spiel. The thing I always say is, the best definition of good manners isn't knowing which fork to use or knowing how to address people in the right form in some foreign language. It's those things that you do that make people feel respected and welcome. That's what manners are for, is to show respect to people. And by that measure, Bill Buckley had the best manners of anybody I have ever known. And one of the great excuses not to have good manners, because he was Bill, in this case, frickin' Buckley. The F doesn't, in fact, stand for frickin'. But, anyway, so it's wonderful to be here. It's particularly wonderful knowing that things are going so well in Washington that we can take the time out to have this genteel conversation about William F. Buckley and firing line, and of course the question of immigration. And firing line in particular was very special. It's an important thing to keep in mind. Is that I first realized this on the first National Review cruise I went on. I had no idea when I decided to have a career as a pundit that I would become, I would essentially work for a right-wing cruise company that puts out a magazine on the side. And I would show up on the boat, and people, I remember I met this woman, and lovely older lady, and she said, "So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I write for the magazine." She goes, "What magazine?" And the reason she asked that is because so many people were, in fact, William F. Buckley fans from firing line. In fact, most people in America who know anything about National Review or know about William F. Buckley got it mostly, at least 30, 40 years ago, from firing line. And firing line's impact and its role in America really almost can't be, I guess it could be exaggerated, but it was truly unique in the sense that you got to remember, in the late 1960s, which was sort of the low water mark of American conservatism, we were still licking our wounds after Barry Goldwater. Liberals were high in the saddle, controlling Washington, controlling all of the commanding heights of the culture. And here comes this guy with his, what he would probably call ornate sesquipedalianism, which means he used big, fancy, big words, comes along and manages to get on our airwaves at a time when the spectrum of airwaves was essentially about 4 channels, PBS plus the 3 networks. And while all of the sort of highbrow intellectuals were trying to tell Americans that George Wallace was the quintessential and archetypal conservative, here comes Bill Buckley, who's more cultured than virtually all of the liberal intellectuals who were trying to make that case. Moreover, he was such an incredibly warm and joyful person. And it was a great show, it won Emmys and all of that, but what it really did was it showed that you could put forth a conservative argument about ideas and be charming and not hate yourself. One of the reasons why I always crack jokes in speeches is because there's this notion that conservatives have to be miserable bastards and that you need a truckload of brand just to crack a smile. And the reality, and what Bill Buckley did is he showed how that the conservative position was not only the better position, the smarter position, but it was also a position that you could put forth with a smile without taking yourself too seriously. And that was hugely important in the culture. And it's amazing to me, to work for National Review is to travel the country and run into people who yell at you, bring back firing line, as if it was in my power. It is not. I can't even get a raise out of these guys. But one of the reasons why people miss it so much in this moment is because of how truly swampified our national discourse has become. And this is not a political event, but I would put forth that it's actually gotten swampier of late. And what Bill did was he did civil discourse. The only person who has ever come close in my lifetime to the civility of firing line was Brian Lamb. But what Brian Lamb did was basically just ask you open-ended questions and let you say what you wanted to say. And there's something very useful about that. What Bill did was he wielded a scalpel while at the same time being fair. And sometimes it got quite pointed, as scalpels can be. There's that famous line about when asked why Robert F. Kennedy refused to ever appear on firing line, and Bill Buckley said, well, why does baloney reject the grinder? I don't do Bill Buckley impersonations, but it actually sounds even better when he said it. And these days, it seems to me we can have a debate about how much baloney and how much grinder there is in our national discourse, but I would say that the baloney has swamped the grinder and the grinders need to be replaced. But there are other things about the show that was so wonderful. And I don't normally go around speaking about firing line because what opportunities are there for that? I have a friend who teaches in college, and he says that the only reference that people 20 and that college-age kids have of William F. Buckley is he's the guy that Robin Williams was impersonating in the movie Aladdin. And they're like, oh, that's what that voice was, because they never saw him on TV. They grew up after Bill, and it's a little depressing. But it seems like, maybe what's old is becoming new again. The very first guest on firing line, the very first one, was Norman Thomas. Norman Thomas was the six-time candidate for president of the United States on the socialist ticket. He showed up on firing line in 1966, blind and ready to fight. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I get the sense there's something about old socialist candidates that just won't quit. And we're seeing that again these days. In fact, I think it would be awesome to watch Bill Buckley interview Bernie Sanders. And the thing is, I think Bernie Sanders would actually enjoy it a great deal. I was reading the notes from the farewell celebration of firing line, and Tom Wolfe was there. He was an old, great friend of Bill's and a frequent guest on the show. And Tom Wolfe said that the great thing about Bill was his ability to bring out the personalities of his guests. And his primary example of this was the fact that Jack Kerouac, who was a lifetime National Review subscriber, showed up on the show so drunk that the only thing he could do was sing. And so I'm absolutely grateful to be here. I am not going to sing for you. But I will say that afterwards, in the reception afterwards, I will be glad to help bring out my personality in a similar way. And now I am supposed to introduce Chris Wolfe, who's going to be taking over tonight. I talked to Christopher beforehand. The original bio they gave of me was long enough to be that of an Oxford Dons. So let's just stipulate he's a very accomplished and impressive man, and he agreed I could keep it shorter. So Dr. Wolfe is a professor of politics at the University of Dallas. He joined the faculty there last fall. Part of that, Dr. Wolfe served at the faculty of Marquette University, my wife's alma mater, for nearly 30 years, serving as a professor and eventually the chairman of the political science department. He will be your moderator this evening. My services have been rendered, and thank you all very much.
Thanks, Jonah. Our debate resolution tonight is resolved that greater low-skilled immigration and legalization for undocumented immigrants is good for America. And taking the negative on this resolution is Team 1. Rich Lowry is editor of National Review, selected by William F. Buckley Jr. in 1997. He's a syndicated columnist and commentator for Fox News Channel. He writes for Politico and often appears on such public affairs programs as Meet the Press and This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Reihan Salam is executive editor of National Review and a policy fellow for the National Review Institute. He's a contributing editor of National Affairs, a member of the board of New America, and an advisor to the Energy Innovation Reform Project and the Niskanen Institute. With Ross Douthat, Salam is the co-author of Grand New Party, How Conservatives Can Win the Working Class and Save the American Dream. Taking the affirmative on the resolution is Team 2. Tim Kane is an economist and research fellow at the Hoover Institution. He has served as a senior economist at the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress and as a U.S. Air Force officer. He is the author of Bleeding Talent and co-author with Glenn Hubbard of Balance, the Economics of Great Powers. Linda Chavez is chairman of the Center for Equal Opportunity and president of the Becoming American Institute, nonprofit public policy research institutes dealing with race, immigration, and assimilation. She writes a weekly syndicated column and is the author of 3 books, including An Unlikely Conservative, The Transformation of an Ex-Liberal. As Lindsay indicated, our format tonight will be individual 7-minute presentations followed by 3-minute cross-examinations. Linda Chavez will speak first and be cross-examined by Reihan Salam. Rich Lowry will then speak and be cross-examined by Linda. Tim Kane will speak next and be cross-examined by Rich. And finally, Reihan Salam will speak and be cross-examined by Tim. After the presentations and cross-examinations, I will read the questions that will be collected in the 2 rounds during the event from the audience during the debate. And so with that, let me turn it over to Linda.
Thank you very much, Chris, and it's great to be with you all. And it's fitting that this is an honor for the Bill Buckley Show firing line, because my entry into public life began in 1983 when I was nominated by President Reagan to become director of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and Bill Buckley had me on his show. I was nervous, even more nervous than I am right now, but I had basically settled down. When Bill Buckley turned to me in his inimicable style and said, "Well, Miss Chavez, I see that you have had 12 years of the Catholic school training, so surely you will agree." And then he prattled off something in Latin. And what he taught me was a very valuable lesson, and that is you simply ignore the question and you say whatever it is you want to say. And I'm going to sort of do that this afternoon in terms of this debate. I did used to be a liberal, but I'm now a conservative, and I became a conservative while I was working for the American Federation of Teachers and came across a book by Adam Smith called Wealth of Nations. And it opened up my eyes to a very important concept, and that concept was the market. I am pleased to be here to debate immigration today among conservatives, because I think there is the mistaken belief that there is one point of view on immigration among conservatives, and there is not. And I am here to present in the affirmative because I do believe in markets. I believe that markets are far more efficient than any group of people, no matter how smart they are, and markets are certainly more efficient and better than government bureaucrats. And yet, since basically 1986, we have had government bureaucrats deciding how many immigrants we need in terms of our economy. Now, prior to 1924, we basically had an open market in immigration. Anybody who wanted to come here simply got on a boat, or if they were closer at hand from Mexico or Canada, they crossed the border. And they were welcomed. Well, they weren't always welcomed with open arms. There was always resentment towards newcomers, whether they were from Scandinavia and Germany or Ireland, as the only immigrants in my family were from. And that regime essentially took us all the way through to the beginning of the 20th century. And in 1924, we began to close the doors. And I'm always fascinated when I'm out debating immigration, because people in the audience will raise their hands and say, well, you know, my grandparents or my great-grandparents came here the right way. They came here legally. Well, when their hair is gray as mine is underneath my hairdo, you know, I look at them and say, well, actually, they came here pretty much the way some of the people are coming here from Mexico now. They simply arrived. There was nothing to keep them out. But since 1924, we have had a system in which the government decided on the number of immigrants that we would need each year, and that number has been more or less fixed. Well, I actually think that when you think about our current situation, we actually do have, in many respects, still a market for immigration. Unfortunately, the government decides how many people come here legally, and the market determines how many people come here illegally. Now, I know that it would surprise a lot of the people who are attending Trump rallies to hear this, but illegal immigration right now is down to a 50-year low. We have not seen as few people crossing into the country illegally as we are seeing now since the 1960s. And it has been basically on a downward trend. Even in terms of the composition of immigrants, Mexico dominated immigration, both legal and illegal, for the last 100 years. Mexico is now only the third highest country in terms of the number of immigrants coming to the United States. It follows China and India. The peak of illegal immigration actually came in the period 1995 to 2000, when about 1.6 million illegal immigrants were coming into the country each and every year. And they were doing so because we had a relatively healthy economy going at the time. There were lots and lots of jobs. So in a sense, it was the market, the employee market, drawing them in. I believe that in terms of immigration policy, employers know a lot more about how many workers they need and what kind of workers they need than the government does. Again, the market works better than any amount of smart people you put into a room to try to dictate rules. 66% of all the jobs in the United States today, according to the Bureau of Labor Standards, require a high school degree or less. And so, unfortunately, we don't have, I believe, enough people to come into the country through the current systems to fill those jobs. Now, I'll only have a minute left, so I will briefly say that one of the things that I think we need to calm down about and quit worrying about is what is going to happen to these immigrants as they stay here. Hispanics, who seem to cause the most fear, are doing quite well. They are learning universally to speak English. 2/3 of second-generation Hispanics prefer to use English at home. They are graduating from high school at rates only 2% less than that of non-Hispanic whites, and they are intermarrying. The American melting pot is working well, And I believe as conservatives, we need to adopt an immigration policy that is flexible, market-based, and brings in not just high-skilled workers, but low-skilled immigrants as well. Thank you. I get cross-examined, I forgot.
So, Linda, thanks so much for your remarks. We've called an audible over here, and I'm going to question you, and Reihan will question Tim. So you say employers know best. So is it your view that employers would be so eager to import this low-skilled labor if the employers had to bear the cost that the government is bearing for their upkeep through various means-tested welfare programs, ranging from food stamps to EITC to Medicaid? It seemed as though the logical consequence of your position is that there should be no welfare state, which we do actually have, and these immigrants use.
Well, first of all, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, immigrants who earn less than 200% of poverty make far less use of means-tested programs due to the native-born, and illegal immigrants, frankly, are not eligible for most of these programs. They do have children, some of whom use them, and the biggest program which is used is the free lunch program. But yes, I absolutely do believe that we have a problem with welfare in this country quite apart from immigration policy. I'm for ending welfare as we currently have it, not just because it costs us money for immigrants, but because it is, I think, sapping and creating a white underclass that is now increasingly dependent to join the already substantial black underclass.
So it's your position we should end the welfare system, and I think we agree with that. Can we forge a consensus around the proposition we will end the welfare system and then we will import low-skilled immigrants who would have taken advantage of that welfare system that we've now ended?
Well, first of all, I think that you're absolutely right that employers have to bear some of the costs. And if we were to enact a guest worker program, I would expect that those employers who are employing guest workers would have to take care of certain needs of those employees, including their health insurance needs.
But they don't. They're on Medicaid.
Well, as a matter of fact, illegal immigrants are not on Medicaid.
Well, low-skilled immigrants, as a general matter, are. And you can't just sort of caveat, oh, they have children and they access welfare through children as though that's not a big deal, because people actually do have kids. And when they have kids, they are citizens of the United States and they are eligible for all these programs. And the entire orientation of the American welfare state is toward supporting low-income workers with children. And that's why so many of these immigrants do access those programs. So it's
Rich,
not
you're acting as if we cannot make changes in current policy. I have actually sponsored immigrants from Somalia, and I've sponsored immigrants from El Salvador. When I sponsored those immigrants, I had to turn in my tax returns, and I had to show that if they, in fact, became dependent, I was capable of supporting them. Now, that has changed.
But that's not...
It's time for this cross-examination.
No, that's not how immigration works today.
It's actually a minute beyond.
But I'm talking about how it should work,
We're going
Rich.
to stop this cross-examination now. So, and this will be an opportunity for Rich to continue his comments.
Okay, so okay.
Hi, everyone. I really enjoyed Jonah's remarks about firing line. My personal experience with firing line, I discovered it when I was in high school, and I was so taken with it, I would religiously record it, and when I didn't understand little bits of the exchange, I would rewind and watch it over again. As you can tell, I wasn't a particularly well-adjusted or popular teenager. It was through firing line that I discovered National Review. I would sneak National Review into my high school classes, hide it in my textbooks, and read it during class. Yes, it's sad to say that what Playboy was to most kids my age, National Review was to me. Thanks for everyone for being here, and especially Harlan Crow, given that his other option would be to be doing keg stands in the comfort of his own home, but instead he's with us this evening. So I actually am going to address the resolution, which is that we need greater levels of low-skilled immigration and we need an amnesty. And this is actually a policy that we've already had. We had a big amnesty in 1986, and we've had higher levels of legal immigration, especially further down the income scale. We've quadrupled the number of immigrants in this country since 1970. Has this solved the problem? No. We actually have a much bigger population of illegal immigrants because an amnesty acts as a magnet for more illegal immigrants to come in. And the more immigrants you have, the more you get because you create social networks that draw further immigrants in. And if you really think about the full force of what our colleagues are arguing for in this resolution, they hold the bizarre position that all things being equal, if we have a less skilled and less educated population, our economy will be better and our society will be better. You know, our public school system is unfortunately very good at producing high school dropouts. Our colleagues want to import more of them. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people in this country who struggle with mastering English. They want to import more of them. We have a lot of poor people. We have a lot of people who use welfare. They want more of them. This is self-sabotage masquerading as shrewd economic policy. Now, there's no doubt that low-skilled immigrants, they come here, they work hard. It's just not enough not to be poor given their low levels of education. Already, 28% of immigrants in this country are high school dropouts. The rate for natives is 7%. You look at the poverty rate of immigrants and their US-born children, 23%. 47% of immigrants and their US-born children are in or near poverty. You look at the number for Mexicans, for Hondurans, for Guatemalans, folks from the countries that are really sending low-skilled immigrants, the poverty rate's above 30, and 67% are in poverty or near poverty. Why is that a significant fact? Because in this country, if you are poor or close to being poor, you have access to welfare. Of households headed by immigrants who are high school dropouts, 76% use one welfare program or more. Among those households headed by immigrants who have just graduated from high school, 63% access access welfare programs. Now, we hear so much about the great turn of the century when we had a massive wave of immigration and everything turned out fine. Well, we didn't have a dominant country like Mexico sending a large share of immigrants, and we didn't have a dominant linguistic group the way we do with Spanish-speaking immigrants today. We did not have ethnic enclaves of the size we do today. It was a different culture they were coming to. In 1910, I know this might be a little frightening, but there were no safe places. And the culture of assimilation is slowly wearing down in this country. Who can forget the famous rendition of E pluribus unum from Al Gore, out of one, many. And in the turn of the century, we had a thriving industrial economy, and we don't today. And what we're doing is flooding the low end of the labor market. 44% of adults who are high school dropouts in the labor force, 44% are immigrants, and they are suppressing the wages of the low-skilled workers who are already here. That's just a matter of supply and demand. And these are workers already, their labor force participation rates are low. Already,
their wages have been stagnating, and our colleagues want to make work even less attractive to them. And you wonder why conservatives have trouble connecting to the working class in this country. We hear often that there are jobs that Americans won't do. Granted, in some instances, this might be the case. Apparently, being a wife of Donald Trump is a job that no self-respecting native will do. But if you look at the census data, they break down 465 occupational categories, and only 4 of those are a majority immigrant. So there is some small net benefit to low-skilled immigration and its suppression of wages. It's good for employers at the margins. It's good for consumers. So this net benefit, though, is redistributed up the income scale, and it's a very small benefit. And if you factor in the fiscal cost of the welfare, the education, the health care of low-skilled immigrants, it's probably all wiped out. Now, in conclusion, we are already looking now, just with the system we have now. By 2023, we'll have a greater proportion of immigrants in this country than ever before. So what our colleagues are proposing is a vast social experiment. We'll have more immigrants than ever before. At the same time, we have a huge welfare state. At the same time, assimilation is breaking down, and at the same time, the economy is tougher than ever. Usually, this case, it hides under gauzy labels like comprehensive immigration reform, but when it is in the light of day, the case for it is as thin, as Abraham Lincoln once said, as a homeopathic soup made by boiling the shadow of a pigeon that starved to death. May that pigeon rest in peace, and the same be done with this resolution. Thank you very much.
I don't know if my mic, oh good, seems like we're on. Well, thank you for having me here. I want to say at the outset that Rich is a friend, Reihan's a friend. I would trust them over the U.S. Congress to devise better policy, and certainly over the White House.
This is damning with faint praise.
Not true. And I've been proud to write in National Review even recently, so these are friends. But so Rich, I have some questions for you.
Sure.
You mentioned this crazy social experiment that we want to conduct. I thought the United States was a crazy social experiment without borders and allowing immigrants. So is this a position where the negative would ask us to melt down the Statue of Liberty and build a wall? I mean, is that the right solution here?
No.
So what would the negative do? What would the negative do, since you don't like the resolution? What would the negative do with the illegal immigrant population
here?
Well,
a couple things. With the illegal population that is here, we have this crazy, I guess, Tim, in your view, un-American idea that we should actually enforce the laws that Congress has passed. You know, Sonny Bono might not have been the greatest intellectual or thinker in the world, but someone asked him once, what do you think of illegal immigration? And he said, you know what? It's illegal, isn't it? And it is. And what we need to do is even more at the border. We've made some progress at the border, but then enforce at the point of employment, actually have an entry-exit visa system, which Congress has said like 6 times we should have, but we don't. And what you'll see is the illegal population will attrit. And Linda, pointed out the illegal immigration has been at a lower ebb lately. Actually, there are signs it's spiking.
I do have one more question,
years.
Rich.
But
you can ask anytime you want.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Was that an answer? Are you satisfied with that answer?
That's great.
But you can
love it. Shorter the better.
You'll attrit the illegal population, and then we can see where we are.
I'll try to make this one simple. I'll
do.
make this one simple in the interest of time and the rules.
You almost caught me on the melting down the Statue of Liberty thing, Tim. But
so which came first, the chicken or the egg? I meant, which came first, the welfare programs or the illegal immigrants? Because with your speech, I thought the immigrants only came here since we've invented these welfare programs.
No, we have a welfare state that is a fact. And again, the whole purpose of the welfare system is to redistribute wealth down to the working poor. And low-skilled immigrants, given how an advanced economy works, are going to be poor, and they're going to have kids. And I think your side of the debate just tends to look at these people as just workers. No, they're human beings. They have needs. They get sick. They go to hospitals. They have kids who have to be educated. And that's the part of the picture that your side of the debate is almost never willing to acknowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. What an honor to be here on this stage. I thought I'd start with some words I scribbled down 77 years ago. Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, an experiment, a crazy experiment, conceived in liberty, not conceived in borders. Now, you've heard this phrase that from one of the presidential candidates, that without a border, you can't have a nation. That would have shocked George Washington. That would have shocked Abraham Lincoln. That would have shocked most conservatives who were the founding conservative thinkers in this country. We were a nation of laws, and I think as my ally in this pointed out, those laws bar illegal immigrants from using the welfare program, and I think that will be a focal point in this debate. I'll try to spread my observations, though, in affirming this resolution to some facts on economics, tell you all about a unique survey we've been doing at the Hoover Institution, and then finally come back to this notion of culture and that chicken or egg question I asked before. Now, I think I'll probably find some like-minded folks in this room who've watched what's happening in Washington and feel like we're constantly given false choices. And on the immigration debate, the politicians love locking us, the public, into false choices. That what do we do with illegal immigrants? As if that's the only aspect of immigration. A minority of immigrants coming in every year, a vast minority, are illegal. We have a country that brings in 1 million legal immigrants every year that add to the economy, that strengthen our economy. And I think our opponents rightly want to not focus on that because we all, and I'm saying this as a compliment, conservatives generally recognize immigration is good for the country. On this resolution, the problem is, should it be limited to just the high skill? Now, I'd put it in this framework. I'm an ex-Air Force officer. My dad was enlisted. My dad surely wouldn't like the idea that only the officers would be allowed in, but keep all the enlisteds out. That our country was built letting the wretched masses yearning to breathe free come into this country. And when I worry about us losing our culture, because I do worry about that cultural loss, it's that. Let's eradicate parts of our past that aren't comfortable with the new welfare system, which I think most people in the room would realize is deeply problematic. That's where the problem is, not with the wretched masses yearning to be free, which I guarantee you involves every one of our ancestors. So let me get economic and talk about some facts. 3 in 4 immigrants are legal residents that are here now. That's the stock. And as far as building a wall, 3 in 5 of the illegal immigrants come here without crossing the border. They come here legally and they overstay their visas. Yes, we need to enforce the laws. 91% of the children of immigrants speak English well. And it's something approaching 99% of the grandchildren speak English well. So we have a fine cultural assimilation. I don't worry about us losing the English language or losing the Constitution or losing any of our Bill of Rights because immigrants come here. I share the concern that we build a system where welfare is open to immigrants, and that's the primary driver. But I haven't seen research showing that. What do I worry about the most as an economist in this country? The loss of entrepreneurship. When Jimmy Carter was president, 1 in 6 companies were startups every year. We had a rich entrepreneurial culture. Today it's 1 in 12, and the number's gone down under every president, precipitously under the current president. Guess who's the most entrepreneurial of all Americans? Immigrants. Twice as likely to start a company are immigrants into this country. They're enriching our culture, and by blocking that and shutting it down, I think, again, we lose something important and cultural. 50% of the companies in Silicon Valley are founded by immigrants. So, we'll all agree, again, on high skill, we need to focus on low skill. I'm going to charge the negative doesn't have an answer. They're stuck in the false choice of you deport everyone or you grant them citizenship. And the resolution you have before you today says grant legal status. That's a consensus opinion of economists that I've surveyed at the Hoover Institution, that we need to come up with a smart guest worker visa program that doesn't give citizenship, doesn't give access to welfare programs, but lets people come here and work. The same inspiration that drew our ancestors here. The other is that we should allow this to also apply to low-skilled immigration. And I would submit that the history of America is a history of economic growth and improvement, and our ancestors were almost all low-skilled. Certainly great-grandpa Ferner, who was a stowaway from Germany, who hid in a box and got halfway across the Atlantic and said, knocked on it and got here, and they kicked him off and he was stuck. America was filled with people like that, and educated their children and sent them off to college and inspired more Nobel Prizes and more scientific discovery that their parents didn't have. Their parents didn't have that education and their scientific knowledge. So I think I would ask you to continue to believe in the American experiment and believe in our culture of transformation and giving people a shot. And I would come back again, and one more minute of my time here. All right, one more minute of my time I'll use. At the Hoover Institution, we instituted a program called Peregrine. It's a survey of immigration scholars right, left, and center to try to get away from these false choices. We asked specifically about a guest worker program, and it had overwhelming support. What would the likely effects be of an expanded immigration guest worker program? 94% of experts said it would increase GDP. 67% said it would have no impact on unemployment. Now you think maybe the other 33% thought it would get worse. No, they were split, about 15-15. And 80% thought that a functional guest worker program, legal status, would decrease illegal border crossings. So if you share with me, and I think the negatives concern that we have too much illegal immigration, the answer is right before you. Let's get a guest worker program that's functional and gets us away from the false choices that Hillary Clinton and others have stuck us in, and not coming up with any sort of legislation, whether it's comprehensive or piecemeal, and that's how we'll restore our American culture.
I feel so fortunate to have an economist here, so I figured that rather than ask questions directly about your remarks just now, I'm going to ask you to offer a couple of definitions. So first, as an economist, can you explain to the audience, to folks who might not have heard of it, what the Pareto principle is?
Pareto principle is that, it's been a while, Reihan.
So just
Pareto principle is that you want to make a policy improvement that either improves both parties, or let's say all parties in a larger group, without making anyone worse off.
Got it. The principle that I had in mind, that is Pareto optimization, the principle I had in mind was that you could have a scenario in which 20% of the people generate 80% of the benefits for a given policy. But that was poor try on my part, but I will ask another question. Can you give the folks in the audience a definition of Baumol's-Cox disease?
Oh, no, I can't. That's been...
Okay, got it. Well,
I'm glad Reihan didn't question me during.
Yeah.
So if there are two countries, one of which is a country in which 1 in 6 people does not know how to read terribly well, and another is a country in which 1 out of 20 people doesn't know how to read terribly well, which would you say is better prepared for the future?
The one with more people who can read well.
Interesting. Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pocket those 3 answers, and I'm ready to go.
Good. So can I use my extended minutes now to go on? Can I?
Well, if that's the case, I'll happily ask more long-winded questions.
The Rich Lowry approach.
You actually had half a minute of your time originally.
Sure. So go ahead, Reihan.
Started on the Balmar paradox.
Yeah, man. I can make something up. No, Baumol was a great entrepreneurial thinker, entrepreneurial economist I should say, and comes back to most economists would agree, entrepreneurship is the key, being innovative is the key, and bringing in people that are innovative is really important. And that's, I think, been a constant part of our country and our lifeblood. So I'd love to answer or, entertain a question on that.
If you have more time if you want it.
No, I think I'm ready to go. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this kind invitation. It's a real honor to be here. And I'm so glad to be part of a spirited debate. Tim was very generous to us, and I'll be very generous to Tim and Linda. These are two incredibly thoughtful, important public intellectuals, and I agree with them on many issues. This happens to be one where I disagree with them rather strongly, but I was very pleased to see that both Tim and Linda actually did Rich and I a number of pretty big favors in their remarks. So when you're thinking about markets, it's kind of important to think about prices. And there's a term that a friend of mine, Stephen Walters, often uses. He uses the term liar's prices. That is, when you're not actually paying the true cost of something. And Rich got at this in our questions earlier on, but it's a pretty important idea. So Linda said that it actually makes rather a lot of sense if employers are going to be a big part of our immigration system, that employers bear some of the cost for the immigrants that they're recruiting to come to the country. Now, if that were to happen, the price of less skilled immigrants would increase pretty dramatically. Think of this in terms of insurance, okay? So, let's say you had to buy an insurance policy every time you brought an immigrant into the country. And what you're insuring against is the possibility that that immigrant is going to need help to lead a decent and dignified middle-class life, okay? So if someone is high-skilled, if someone has demonstrated that they have high earning potential, the cost of that insurance policy would be pretty cheap. If someone, in contrast, does not have those skills, not through any fault of their own, but because the skills that they're bringing to them, the experiences, the trauma that they might have experienced in their native country, is such that the likelihood of their experiencing these adverse outcomes is actually pretty high. So as some of you have probably guessed, I myself come from an immigrant background. My parents are immigrants who came to the United States in the mid-1970s. And they came at a time when the foreign-born share of the population was much lower than it is today, and also the US economy was dramatically different than it is today. One thing that's changed between when my parents came to the United States and today is that the share of men who don't have a high school diploma, who are neither working who are not working or who are incarcerated, has increased dramatically. Since 1980, it's increased by over 50%. Now, has the number of people who've dropped out of the labor force increased dramatically because opportunities for less skilled workers have gotten much, much better in recent decades? The answer is no. Unfortunately, opportunities for less skilled laborers have actually deteriorated pretty dramatically over that period of time. And when we're looking to the future, we're looking at a whole suite of changes. We're looking at the prospects for greater automation in our society as well. Now, when you think about automation, automation is going to affect our society very unevenly. It is likely to affect people who work with their backs. And again, these are people who are working with their backs not because they're bad people, but because that is what they know. Those are the skills they have. Those are the skills they're bringing to the table. So actually, if we're looking at the past 30 years, we already see this deterioration. If we look into the future as well, we're likely to see even more deterioration. I want to talk to you about a little company called Udacity. This is a company that provides people with skills. It has a tremendous business model. You pay about $200 a month and you get as many credits as you want. And what Udacity does is they connect American workers. It's a company founded by an immigrant, by the way. And what they do is they connect American workers with tutors who are in the Philippines, who are in India, who are a variety of other countries. And those tutors are earning wages that would be very low by American standards, but are actually very high by the standards of India and the Philippines and other countries. When we're talking about the benefits associated with immigration that Tim has cited, the thing is that technology is changing in ways that ensure that we can capture all of those benefits through what you might call virtual immigration or through outsourcing. Now, what that means is that the United States is in a position to take a more selective approach because, one thing that you do is you earn income, right? But then you also spend money, and then you also consume services. So if we were to take a more selective approach, what we would say is this. Okay, we want to draw on the talents of people from all over the world, just the way that a lot of you guys might have televisions made in China or elsewhere. We want to draw on those talents. We don't want to bar ourselves to that talent, regardless of where it comes from. But let's think about who is going to make which contributions to our society and who's going to be best suited to actually helping us deal with many of the problems we already have. So you could say, well, this person, I'm willing to pay her $30 per hour for her services. That's a pretty high wage. This other person, maybe I'm willing to pay $5 per hour. Now, when I'm talking about selecting an immigrant to settle in the United States, I might say, well, given that I can enjoy the services this person provides without allowing her to settle in the United States, why don't I allow her to earn that wage, which will actually go much further in her native country, and then say, well, the person making $30 an hour, $90 an hour, or more than that, they're more than welcome to come. This is not barring that less skilled person from economic opportunity. Rather, it's recognizing that we can leverage technology to yield every single economic benefit that Tim is talking about, while being thoughtful about the fact that we have an enormous amount of entrenched, multi-generational poverty in this country today. And I dare say that our immigration policy should be based on a very simple principle. Let's bring people into our country who are in a position to help us deal with the deep, entrenched poverty we have today. Now, that's not to say that impoverished people don't want to help. The problem is that they have a very difficult time earning a high enough wage to lead a decent and dignified middle-class life by our standards. Now, one thing we could do is lower those standards. I might disagree with a lot of folks in this room in that I believe that there is a strong place for a safety net. I think we need it. Why do I think we need it? Because a lot of those children who are the children of poor immigrants, they're going to be our workforce tomorrow. And in many cases, those parents, they simply cannot do enough for those kids. And that's why, in many cases, the children of poor immigrants, they need extra help. This is why we're talking about pre-K right now. Now, whatever you think about pre-K programs and other enrichment programs, there's a reason people are concerned about this. There's a reason people offer SNAP to very poor people, including the children of very poor immigrants. The reason they offer SNAP is because we have a great deal of data now, which shows that there are tremendous cognitive benefits for infant brain health when you have SNAP benefits. So we could say, as some of our libertarian friends do, that a mass immigration of this kind is just fine as long as we bar people from all of these benefits. The trouble is that those children are going to be a part of our society. We are responsible for them. If we offer amnesty to less skilled immigrants, guess what? Less skilled immigrants are extraordinarily poor, and they're going to need our help. And it's also true that more less skilled immigration actually has strongly negative effects on the less skilled immigrants who live in our country right now.
Time.
This is what we need to think about. Thank you very much.
Reihan, how many people have you employed in your career?
Let's see, right now or throughout my life?
Yeah, in your life.
Right now, I work with about 3 people.
About 3 people. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to give you a little perspective, we heard a lot about my public policy background. For 20 years, I've sat on the boards of Fortune 500 companies, one of which was Pilgrim's Pride, one of the largest employers here in the state of Texas. We employed about 100,000 workers in poultry processing, and I currently sit on the board of ABM Industries. We employ about 100,000 people doing various facility management, including janitors. And I say that because, as I said in my presentation, 66% of the jobs in the United States today require a high school degree or less. Would you like your child to grow up to work at the poultry processing plant in Pittsburgh, Texas?
I will answer your question by noting a fascinating new technology called the lettuce bot. This is a device that now folks on farms can use to displace agricultural labor. It can do the work of about over 20 workers. And if you're looking at things like janitorial services and other functions, I'm going to throw out a wild guess and suggest that over the next 10 to 20 years, we are going to have the ability to do many of these things, not with imported, less skilled labor, but rather with machines.
And
there's a complementary, pardon me, just for one moment, there is a complementary between skilled workers and less skilled workers, but there's also a complementary between workers of any kind and machines, and that is likely to become more salient in the years to come.
Okay, 66% of our jobs, in other words, that require a high school degree or less today are going to get wiped out. I want to just ask you briefly, I just want to ask you briefly, Reihan, you claim to speak for, American workers, those at the less skilled level who are American born. Are they going to be happier to be replaced by a machine than they are by a Mexican?
Yes, absolutely, because the thing is that when you think about labor productivity, When you have more capital, this is actually why the kind of left-wing perspective that workers and capitalists are at odds is actually entirely false. If you're looking at more affluent countries, the difference is that we have more capital. And when you have more capital, workers are able to produce far more. So one of the amazing things about immigration, one of the reasons why the United States is such an immigration magnet, is that you can have the exact same worker moving from a place that is capital poor to a place that is capital rich and command a much higher wage. The trouble is that this displacement, the automation displacement that we talked about a moment ago, really is going to happen, and we're already seeing it in a variety of different occupations. Now, the trouble is that we have a choice right now. We can choose to make that future challenge a much bigger and more difficult challenge by bringing in more workers who are likely to be displaced, or we can say, look, today we already have large numbers of less skilled immigrants and other very poor people who are going to need help over the course of that transition. Perhaps some of you guys have heard about deindustrialization.
I think you're
deindustrialization has caused a great deal of displacement. Yes, of course.
Time's up for both of you.
Okay, well, I would just say I don't think people are going to be happier to see those jobs going to Mexico.
I think they'll be happy to earn higher wages because they will have more capital at their disposal.
Thank you. So, my apologies to people whose questions we won't be able to get to, but we'll only have time for a limited number of them.
Brief answers.
Yes, I strongly encourage, and maybe one person at the most from each side perhaps would be a good rule as well. So the first question is, historically, immigrants flee the growth of large states toward a free society from the British Empire, Italy, Germany, Russia, the US, so forth. How can conservatives engage legal Hispanic immigrants on the side of a free society and the rule of law?
I'll take that. First of all, I think that we are encouraging Hispanic immigrants, and I think if we want to have a respect for the rule of law, one of the best ways that we could do it is to change our legal immigration laws so that we can bring people here whom we need legally rather than basically a wink and a nod and turning our head as people come here illegally.
Just briefly, I'll say that if you're looking at legal Hispanic immigrants and native-born Hispanics, what you will find is that many of them are working class and lower middle class. They're hardworking people like everyone else, and they care about the same economic issues that other lower middle class and working class folks care about. One pattern we do see, however, which is that people with below average incomes tend to be more favorably disposed to redistribution. And that makes perfect sense because they're the beneficiaries of that redistribution. We shouldn't be all that surprised by that, and that's always going to be a challenge. When you're looking at people of Hispanic origin further up the income scale, people who are skilled, they tend to be less favorably disposed to redistribution.
Can I make a very brief comment about Linda keeps on saying we need to import in the people we need. At the same time, she purports to be a big fan of market forces. Well, there's a very important market force at the disposal of employers. They can pay native workers more. It is not beyond their power to do that. And what we've seen is that industries like meat processing have become dependent on these social networks that are much easier for them to use because they can pay them less and they can treat the workers more poorly. The wage for meat folks who work in meat processing plants has declined something like 45% since the 1980s. Well, maybe you need to pay a little bit more. There's a famous case of a plant that was raided several years ago, and it said it was going to shut down, and then they actually hired native workers and paid them a little bit more.
We lost 400 employees because of a raid in Pittsburgh, Texas. We were paying $19 and $20 an hour. When we lost those illegal workers, we couldn't pay enough to keep people on the job at native workers. It isn't because of the pay, it's because the jobs are hard. And frankly, we spend way too much money educating people in the United States, the native born, to expect them to go and cut up chicken parts all day.
Poultry processing is not the industry of the future. That'll just be my, kind of just throwing it out there.
Okay, next question. On an economic margin, the benefits of immigration are difficult to argue against. But what about the effect of large-scale immigration on institutions as they vote heavily Democratic and aren't necessarily pro-market?
Well, I disagree that they vote heavily Democratic. And let me come back to the economic point, though. One thing that I neglected to mention in my remarks, and we have to say here, is that there are no economic studies that show low-skill immigration or high-skill immigration hurts the employment prospects of Native Americans. I know people will say George Borjas. George Borjas was a professor of mine at UC San Diego before he went on to Harvard. His best studies show a minor impact on employment over the short term for low-skill natives. After a 5-year period, that's gone. Because immigrants from all skill levels, this is the economics, these are the facts, add to our economy. They add to demand in our economy, not just taking jobs away. It's the same fallacy that free trade just takes jobs away. We're interlinked, and immigrants help our economy. That just has to be established. So don't fall for the anecdotes about the lettuce and capital versus labor. That's all very confusing. Just stick with the facts. I'll have a cultural debate all day long. But I'm not going to stand for an economic debate that our employment is hurt. Our unemployment rate right now is strong. The fact that we've got labor force participation rates dropping has everything to do with bad government policy and welfare programs that pay people not to work. It's got nothing to do with illegal immigration, which went net negative with Mexico because the market didn't have jobs for them, and so they started to go home. Those are the economic facts.
So the economist who has done the most work to suggest that less skilled immigration does not have negative effects is a guy called Giovanni Perri, a very important economist Tim knows very well. Giovanni Perri recently published a fascinating new paper about the effects of naturalized immigrants on political outcomes, and he found definitively that it increases vote share for Democrats. So, you know, Giovanni Perri might be a great economist when he says the one thing. I hope he's also a great economist when he says the other, which is that immigration is definitely skewing our political system to the left. So thank you for that, Tim. The other thing I'll note is that when we're looking at these studies talking about native wages, the Perry studies find that there might be in the neighborhood for less skilled workers a benefit of less than 1%, an extremely modest benefit. And if you look at a policy like reforming the corporate tax code, if you look at anything like raising the Social Security age, any number of those policies would swamp that effect. So, you know, if we're talking about that as the kind of critical issue here, you know, I'm not so sure we would embrace increasing less skilled immigration. I'd also mention that 16% of the workforce in the United States consists of foreign-born workers, and those same studies that Tim is citing, pretty much every single one of them acknowledges that new less skilled immigration reduces wages for existing less skilled immigrants in the United States. Now, if you believe, as I do, that 16% of the workforce is pretty big, given that they represent a much higher share of poor workers, and given that those folks have children, and given the fact that those children suffer from educational disadvantage and many other disadvantages in their life, the fact that, you know, this less skilled immigration is pushing down their wages seems like something that we might want to care about. So I care as much about natives as the next guy, but let's care a little bit about the immigrants who live in this country right now as well.
The question was about politics. So as somebody who's actually old enough to remember the election in 1972, Richard M. Nixon actually won a third of the Mexican-American vote in that election. And until the Republican Party began to be identified as the anti-immigrant party, Hispanics were voting in great numbers, not in a majority, granted, in most places, but in presidential elections, President Reagan got 44% of the vote. George W. Bush got about the same amount of the vote. Richard Nixon, as I said, got that amount of vote. So Republicans can win Hispanics, but not if they are wanting to deport their neighbors
I'll just say
and
that
their grandparents.
The Hispanics in the United States in 1972 were markedly different than those in the United States in 2016, partly because, as Linda pointed out, you had a huge surge of immigration after that period. The bulk of the Mexican immigration has been in the last 40 years, so it was actually long after that period of time. During that era, that was largely third and fourth generation Mexican Americans. It was a very different population.
Well, don't worry, Reihan, they're not mostly naturalizing. Only about 40% of them are, in fact,
there was, however,
so
a
they're not
wave
going to be
of
voting.
defensive naturalization in the mid-1990s when Republicans in Congress proposed limiting welfare benefits. You had what the sociologist Douglas Massey, who was a big open borders guy, talked about a wave of defensive naturalization to defend access to safety net programs. You had people naturalize, and then we will likely see another such wave in the near future.
The group that's most favorably disposed to Obamacare, according to all the polls, is Hispanics.
the problem goes deeper than immigration. They have a different attitude towards government and big government than conservatives do. And if I could just circle back to something that Tim said, how wonderful the job market is, it is. If you're a college graduate or above, how good is the job market for high school dropouts? That's the question that's relevant, again, to the resolution of this debate, which the affirmative side constantly wants to sidestep.
Tim, do you want to respond to that? Or?
No, I want to hear more questions from the audience.
Okay.
As I said.
I made my point. You all know my point.
Is there any way of cushioning the impact of legal immigration on the jobs and wages of low-skilled Americans?
Is there any way of cushioning?
Cushioning the impact of legal immigration on the jobs and wages of low-skilled workers?
Well, I tend to think that's a fallacy, that immigrants have added to the economy. We look at the neighborhoods where there's greater immigration, the states where there's more immigration, and those tend to be the states that are performing very well, very strongly. So we have a strong correlation between immigration and growth, immigration and higher wages. And I'd point out there's a bit of a paradox here, and I'm also going to plead that you look back at the resolution. First, the paradox is, on the one hand, we hear critics of immigration say they're accessing all these welfare programs, as if their labor force participation is so low and they're unemployed and they're using them. On the other hand, their labor force participation rate is so high.
Guys, let me finish my point. Tim, I explicitly said that they work.
Rich, let him finish, okay?
A little politeness. That their labor force participation rate is so high and they're taking jobs away from us. And I would argue that the participation rates of immigrants and native workers are not correlated. In fact, we see where there's stronger immigration, there's a stronger economy. And then finally, my final point, and I'm not going to get into the rejoinders back and forth. On the resolution, realize if you were all asked to judge tonight, on the one hand of this idea of what to do with illegal immigrants that are here, I'm for stronger E-Verify. I'm for a lot of the licensing programs and requiring the illegal immigrants and guest workers not access welfare programs. So a lot of these points that are, arrows that are being slung here aren't at our position. They're not taking out the affirmative position. On the one hand, you have Hillary Clinton, which says, and Nancy Pelosi, they say give everyone citizenship. On the other hand, which is the negative, they say, no, you've got to deport. We're saying there's a middle ground. Those are false choices, and it's legal status. Don't give citizenship, allow people to work and add to our economy.
And by the way, that's what they want, is legal status. I mean, there've been polling done on this issue among illegal immigrants. They are in favor of legal status, and they would gladly give up the right to become citizens if they could get legal status and be able to work legally.
Tim, just with all due respect, I stood there and said that low-skilled immigrants come here to work, and they do work. The fact is that even though they do work, they are still poor, and we have a welfare system and a tax system that are meant to support the working poor. This is why, Tim, in things you've written, you said we should legalize illegal immigrants, but we should ban them from welfare. Because if you didn't ban them from welfare, these illegal immigrants who already access welfare to some extent because they have U.S.-born children would get even more welfare. And I submit to you, if the affirmative side is very concerned with attracting Hispanic voters to the Republican Party, as we all should be, saying you're going to legalize these people, cut them off from the welfare system, maybe cut their children off if you're very serious about cutting them off from the welfare system. That is not a sustainable position. And saying they should be second-class citizens forever and have no citizenship also is not sustainable.
He's addressing.
Okay.
So I'm going to, the reason, Rich, I just want to make a comment, not to rejoinder, but to grant you that there will be some access, that there will be immigrants that come here and have children, just like there are business travelers that come here and have children and tourists that come here. And yeah, they'll use our schools, and that's appropriate. And but I think when I talk about access to welfare programs, I think about a single male who's coming here to work who then becomes unemployed. So I'm granting you some ground. I still think on net, the right solution is legal status, not deportation.
But I have to jump in here because there is this assumption that the children of these immigrants are somehow part of the permanent underclass. It's simply not true. They are graduating high school at the same rate as non-Hispanic whites. They are actually more likely to go on to college, even though it's often a 2-year college. 21% of them actually finish a 4-year degree. Their income levels go up. They intermarry. They are doing what every single generation of immigrants have before. The immigrants always struggle, but their children do well. And Hispanic second-generation Americans are doing better than the children, for example, of Italian immigrants who took 70 years to catch up to other Americans in their educational attainment.
If I may, just because Linda has made a number of interesting and important claims, when you're looking at outcomes for second-generation Hispanics, what you need to do is actually compare them to their parents' generation, right? So if I came in 1970, I would have children that you could then track, let's say, in the year 2000. And now George Borjas, an economist that Tim mentioned earlier on, has actually done this work. And what he found is that in different eras, if you compare the immigrants and their earnings, and then if you look 20 to 30 years later and look at the earnings then of second-generation immigrants, that's actually the salient comparison. Because if you're comparing second-generation immigrants today to today's influx, you're actually not looking at the children of that wave of immigrants, right? And so what he found is that when you're looking at that wave and then you're looking at their children, those children do close the gap in terms of income by about 8 percentage points. The problem is that in earlier eras, for example, in 1970, back when Nixon was in the White House, that was an era when immigrants actually had above average incomes and their children had higher income still. But if you're looking at the immigrant influx from 1980 beyond to the present, those immigrants had wages that were about 20% below the median. And now that implies, and actually what we're seeing right now already, is that the second generation, if you're looking at kind of people of Mexican origin, et cetera, that's a group where actually they have not caught up to the median. And if you look at the median for non-Hispanic whites, so I just dispute the salience of those numbers. I think what we'd want to do is, have social networks become less salient? Are we in a less stratified society today? Are we in a society in which growing up very poor makes you more likely to enter the middle class today than would have been the case in earlier eras? I'd say the answer to all those questions is no.
There is no convenient place at which to interject and end this debate. So I'm going to choose this inconvenient spot to interject and call an end to this wonderful debate. Thank you very much. Rich, I think Rich Lowry will have some concluding remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to continue my answer on the enforcement system and how we deal with the problem with illegal immigrants. Now, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I want to especially thank Tim and Linda. The resolution might have been a little convoluted, but you will not believe the negotiations that went into this resolution. The Paris Peace Accords were simpler than coming up with this resolution. I also want to thank my colleague Reihan. I want to thank Harlan Crow once again for this beautiful space. My hope is that we had a My hope is that we had a debate at least a little bit worthy of this space, but I kind of don't think so. We would have to be debating a declaration of war or something. And with that, we invite you to join us at the reception, and thank you very much again.